Good evening. I'm Dan Lothian of GBH. Thank you for joining us tonight for our second virtual forum on the state of race in Massachusetts, partnered with the Boston Globe, the NAACP Boston branch, and the World Channel. I want you to imagine sending your child to school. They arrive to see teachers who don't look like them, substandard buildings and classrooms without the proper teaching tools. They leave believing they don't deserve better and spend the rest of their life expecting less. Welcome to the opportunity gap, formerly known as the achievement gap. As for a definition, this bystander in Copley Square summed it up pretty well.
There is an idea of lowered expectations, and therefore what we want out of minority students and what we expect out of women students, particularly in STEM classes, is a form of opportunity gap. We don't expect them to succeed, so they don't succeed.
And this woman was adamant that money is the problem.
It's about dollars and cents, don't get me wrong, because there's plenty of charter schools that get money and the public schools go without. The playing field needs to be balanced.
But what if those things are just symptoms of the bigger issue? Does it all come down to race? And if so, what do we do about it? During the next hour, we'll talk about the opportunity gap from the perspective of a single mom, a public school principal, and our expert guests from our community and beyond. Joining me now, Gloria Ladson-Billings, former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor of Urban Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Good evening.
Jamal Grant, former Boston Public School student and founder of the NET Mentoring Group.
Great to be here tonight.
Bianca Vázquez, education reporter at the Boston Globe.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Gloria, Jamal, Bianca, of course, welcome to the show. And for those of you watching at home, we want you to join the conversation as well. Send us your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can throughout the hour. Let's start out with this stunning statistic from the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University. By the time children enter kindergarten, Black children are on average nearly 9 months behind in math and almost 7 months behind in reading compared to their white, non-Hispanic peers, even though Black and white children are enrolled in early childhood education programs at nearly the same rate. Early on, white children are far more likely to be enrolled in advanced and high-quality programs. So, Gloria, it boggles the mind. How in the world does this gap occur so early before kids even show up to kindergarten?
Well, Dan, your relatively simple question actually has a complex set of answers. And those answers include the individual, what teachers they seem to be placed with, the institutional, what schools they are attending, and systemic, the way the society is organized. And so in some ways, I'd like to flip that question and say, instead of measuring kids based on what schools want to know, what if we took a more neutral measure like human development? And here's what you'd find out. Black children, on average, sit, crawl, stand, and walk faster than white children, on average. But no one would say that there's a development gap between Black and white children. So we've got to figure out, what are we calling the standard? And what is it we're trying to measure?
And that's a huge lift, though, is it not, to change the standard? Bianca, maybe you could talk about that a little bit. You've been covering education for quite some time. Just changing the standard to look at something else to measure students would be like climbing up a mountain, no?
Perhaps, but we've seen a lot of crazy things happen during this time, right? And there are people in Massachusetts who are arguing for changing the standards that schools are measured by and looking at things like, student satisfaction, whether parents and children as students feel comfortable in their schools. And that seems like an important measure to me. And, maybe during this incredible, strange time when so many other things have gone out the window, like in-person schooling, maybe that'll get more traction now.
Right. And Jamal, I want to go back to this notion of the expectations game, right? If children really don't think that people expect a whole lot of them, does it in fact change their behavior?
I think this is a timely and very important question. I want to actually share perhaps a small anecdote from my life. As a child, kindergarten through second grade, I had no behavioral issues. I would like to say I was a great child. I will have to admit that perhaps I'm not the most objective judge of that. But third grade, I had a teacher, and that teacher, great guy, very nice guy, happened to be a white male. The problem, however, I would say was twofold. One was that his expectations didn't seem to match my potential. Secondly, I think lack of some cultural competency led him perhaps to, as well-meaning as being a well-meaning person, see my actions or actions of other students as probably more problematic or more tied to our environments than maybe they were. So I remember in third grade I had a teacher. He was a black male teacher who came in. His name was Mr. Dodson. Mr. Dodson came in. I had cried to my parents, said I did not want this super strict teacher. However, Mr. Dodson actually held me to a higher standard than my previous teacher. And this is even with, having very supportive parents at home. Mr. Dodson worked with my parents, and I remember him setting a standard for me. I want you to get all A's. And that all A's came in as a fourth grader at a time where, at the very least, subconsciously, I was defining who I was as a student. And from that, I started to define myself as a smart student, and that has not failed me ever since.
Wow. And to all of you, and I know because in my own life, I can look back at individuals who really set the high bar, right? Where others may have thought, well, this is what he can do. Others were saying, those that really stand out were saying, this is what we think he can do well beyond that. Is that really, that seems like a relatively simple fix, right? Just by looking a child in the eye and saying, no, you don't have to settle for being a C student or even a B student. You can really achieve A's.
Well, I'll say that I had very high bars set for me in my segregated elementary schools in Philadelphia, where I had teachers that were constantly pushing me, constantly telling me, you can do this. There's no reason why you can't be the best. What they said to me put me in good stead when I went to desegregated middle and high schools, where I was thought to not necessarily be the best, but I could hear that voice in the back of my head saying, no, you can do this. So those encouragements really do matter. And we have actually a fair amount of research on teacher expectation and what that yields.
So I want to now